Channel 10 Nelson, your community access television. Programming on this channel is made by local volunteers. If you would like to be a part of your community television, please call 354-4200 or write to Shaw Cable, 613 Ward Street, Nelson, B1L1T2.
Good evening and welcome to the Shaw Cable Phone-In Television Forum. The topic tonight is forest land use, how the public makes a difference. I'm your host and moderator, George Millar, and with me, introducing them alphabetically, on my far left, Dale Anderson of the Ministry of Forests, and passing over to the person next to me, Earl Hamilton, West Arm Watershed Alliance. On my right, Russ McArthur, Nelson and Area Watershed Committee. And on his right, Blair McLeod, Kalisnikoff Lumber. And in between Dale and Earl, Marie Wells, Kootenay Centre for a Sustainable Future. Welcome to the program. We're going to give each of these individuals 2 minutes to give a little bit about their own background and the background of the group they represent this evening, and then we'll go to questions. Dale, we'll begin with you.
Well, I'm with the Ministry of Forests, or the Forest Service. You can use either term, they're both valid. My position is in the planning department, and I work primarily with the preparation of plans at the local level, primarily at the watershed level, and also a fair bit on the public involvement program. In other words, working with members of the public who have concerns and want to raise them, in a nutshell.
Thank you. Earl?
Well, George, I'm a member of the West Arm Watershed Alliance. I'm not really here tonight as their spokesperson. I will probably be speaking to some of their concerns tonight, but I have been director on the Regional District of Central Kootenay for the past 3 years and continue as the alternate director for Area F, but I'm also very involved in seeing, if I can, that the public interest is served in resource development in Nelson, and see that we are very judicious in the way we proceed in future developments, and I'm always happy to add my views to a forum such as we have here tonight.
Thank you, Earl. Russ?
I am the Secretary of the Nelson and Area Watershed Committee, which went into action in 1980 when we first heard that the Ministry of Forests was planning to do some logging in the area behind Nelson. We were very active in the first few years, held meetings very regularly, but since KFP closed down, we haven't been meeting so often. However, I, as a representative of the Watershed Committee, and also for a time as a representative of the city, was meeting with the Nelson Watershed Management Team, which was set up by the Ministry of Forests.
Thank you, Russ. Blair?
George, I work for Kalisnikoff Lumber. I'm involved with both silviculture and harvest planning. I do the on-field work. I do all the data gathering and compile it and come up with prescriptions that are suitable for all parties that are interested.
Thank you. Marie?
Hello, my name is Marie. I'm a member, like Earl, let me start again. I'm a member of the Kootenay Centre for a Sustainable Future, and I'm not representing them as such tonight, though a lot of my views are similar to their views. I have a background, I came from the coast originally, from a logging family. My husband worked for the Forest Service, and we now are partners in a small business. We sell and distribute recycled paper, creating an alternative business for ourselves. As a member of Kootenay Centre for a Sustainable Future, I've been involved with organizing 3 public forums that we've had on local forestry issues. The last one was in January, and I most recently attended a conference in Victoria on local control of forestry, where there were representatives of industry, ministries of environment and forest, labor groups, environmental groups. Basically 300 people from all over BC came to express their interests and views on local control. It was very interesting experience.
All right, thank you. Now, this is a phone-in program, but we are going to give our panel some time to answer some questions and perhaps elaborate on their position that they've stated here and ask each other some questions for about another 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open the phone lines and hopefully we'll hear questions from a lot of you people watching there this evening. The first question I would ask, and Marie, since we had you give your opening statement last, we'll begin with you. As a representative of, in this case, the KCSF, are you receiving much public interest or inquiries regarding land use in this area, and what kind of interest is being shown?
Well, the most recent interest we have received followed the forestry forum that we did here in January. We had a weekend workshop, and out of that there were a number of people, actually kind of new faces in the Nelson scene, showed some interest in reenacting some involvement in the Nelson watershed and the logging that is proposed to take place there. Have talked with Donna McDonald somewhat in terms of working with the city or finding ways that we can protect our watershed here in Nelson. So that's the most recent involvement we've seen. I think Wawa has taken a lot of the more dynamic movement in this area, or certainly more in the forefront in this area than the Nelson community has been recently. We tend to sort of divide ourselves up into local watershed groups, it seems like, more interested in what goes on in our immediate backyards.
Right, and the group you represent, of course, is much wider than that, so there would be several watersheds within your group's general jurisdiction. Blair, your position on this?
Well, currently Kalisnikoff deals with 3 watersheds. One's Blueberry, one's the Blewett, and one right now is the Deer Park. We've been currently dealing quite successfully with these people for a number of years. All issues are out front, straightforward, and if anything does arise, usually we'd actually bring the people out, show them what we have in mind, show them problems, make them fully aware of what's going on, and present it that way to them. And then we work together to establish some sort of a medium line, and what's best, the decision that's made is usually the best involved. That's it.
All right, Russ.
The Watershed Committee has been working really quite closely with the City Council, and most years has presented a report to City Council. In that sense, there has been an involvement with the problem, because in recent years most of the activity has been with the watershed management team set up by the Ministry of Forests, and including the Ministry of the Environment, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Mines. because we've been involved with them there, and because there has not been any sort of obvious activity in the Nelson watershed area, we haven't been holding meetings. But as soon as there is a new licensee appointed for the Nelson watersheds, and as soon as action starts, we will certainly want to call public watershed committee meetings.
All right, thank you. And Earl?
Well, with the Parks Plan 90 panel that was here, I guess about 2 weeks ago tonight, there was a tremendous interest in preservation of, at least what I could see, the preservation of what's been called the West Arm Watershed Park. And essentially, it may not be a move to preserve this area so much as to plan development of this area. And the preservation position is one that is kind of we're asking that a very careful look be taken at this area before logging begins. And I think logging is expected to begin very soon from what I've been given to understand. And the local public health people have said that the most important thing to the people in this area as a health issue is the water quality. And we view the water quality as being inextricably bound up in the proper harvesting of the forest or the maintenance of forest cover where it's necessary to protect that water quality. So I think the position that I have is that I want to be very careful about any development that's undertaken, and I want the largest possible number of people that have a vested interest in the area, the business people, the logging people, the tourist people, the small business person. I want everyone to be involved in making this decision, because I think that how we develop this west arm that we've got here on the wall next to us is going to, in large part, determine the future, the future forever, really. I mean, basically what we've got here is tremendous water quality and other tremendous values, aesthetic, wildlife values, and I really think that we have to see what we have here in terms of determining the value of what we have here before we decide that we're going to liquidate it for whatever purpose.
Okay. Dale, you perhaps are in a slightly different role here than these other people, in the sense that you work for a ministry that, in theory at least, represents the people. But are you receiving at the ministry offices much public interest or inquiries on this issue?
Oh, yes. Surprised?
Not really?
Considerable. On a number of issues, actually. As Earl mentioned, there is a great deal of local interest in the south shore of the West Arm, which includes, of course, the Nelson watershed. One thing that I've noticed, I've been working for the Forest Service for just over 4 years now, and I would say that in that time, the amount of public interest and consequently the amount of time that we spend on public involvement has doubled at least. And I don't want to make excuses, but I would like to just point out that we're still attempting to address that with the same number of staff that we had 4 years ago. Did you want to get into the next question of what kind of interest is shown?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Then I'll carry on. As near as I can tell, say 5 years ago, the majority of the public interest that we encountered, and this was at the beginning of my job here, but people seemed to be mostly concerned with issues that were close to home, what was happening in their immediate watershed or in their immediate viewscape. And people are still concerned about these things, but increasingly I think there's an increased awareness of the larger picture. Issues like the state of forest management over the entire province, the country, the world for that matter. Mm-hmm. Issues such as global warming come up at local meetings of watershed committees. People who are concerned about what forest management practices might, how they might affect the production of carbon dioxide for the mm-hmm. atmosphere. So there's an interesting point here, though. There's an increase in, I think, awareness of the larger picture, but there's also definitely an interest in approaching resolution of those problems at the local level.
All right, thank you.
Decentralization.
We're going to shift gears just a little bit in how we handle things now. We've been kind of stilted, rigid, and each person taking their turn. From here on in, when I ask a question, so long as we observe a little bit of rules in that if somebody has started speaking, you don't interrupt, we'll make for a little more give and take on things as we go along. And the next area we want to take a look at, and whoever who chooses to respond first, just jump right in. What kinds of channels are available to individuals who have a concern related to forest land use, and who should they contact if they have a concern? And in other words, who would any of you recommend that a person with a concern go to?
Well, it's important for the public to actually become involved with the planning process. Every year we present our 5-year development plan, which entails all of our harvesting for a 5-year period. Years 1 and 2 and 3 are usually quite ironclad set, and we are going to be harvesting at that level and the way we have said. Years 4 and 5, actually the initial start of cutting permit development, people have a lot of input into these. By viewing the plans, they can have either their pro or con statements registered, and we'll address them accordingly.
I feel that Nelson people have 2 levels of approach to their own getting input on their own watersheds. The first is City Council, and as these matters become come up for more vigorous discussion, I'm sure that the City Council is going to be welcoming input from individuals and groups. But in addition to that, there's, of course, the Watershed Committee, and we will be opening up our meetings again when there seems to be some point in doing it. We all know that there's only one licensee going to be operating in the Nelson watersheds. That we had a licensee, and it turned out that he could not be kept. So they've been looking for another licensee, and when that licensee is selected, then we'll be going ahead possibly rather quickly. But the Nelson City has a very strong stake in this, because Nelson is required by law as a purveyor of water to provide water of high quality, and yet at the same time it has no legal power over its watersheds. Now, for many city councils have requested the Ministry of Forests to give it control over its watersheds, and this of course has been refused. The stance of Nelson City Council is still that there should be no logging in Nelson watersheds, even though they are taking part in the operations of the team, because they felt that at least that way they'd have a foot in the door. But that is the official policy of Nelson City Council, that there be no logging in Nelson watersheds. I think that as we move forward in time now, there's going to have to be input by citizens to council, and we will welcome input also to the Watershed Committee. They can get in touch either with the president, who is Elizabeth Wallach, or with me, Russ McArthur.
Thank you. Someone else care to respond?
I guess I would just, and this may seem to be a depressing answer, and this is only my own view, and I've come to it after a long time, and I used to be up, when I was up north, on what was called at that time a public advisory committee into forestry practices for a number of years in the terrace area, and we met with the Forest Service once a month quite faithfully over a number of years, and the public was actually involved in decisions that were undertaken by the ministry in regard with to logging practice. Now, since I've been down here, and Dale could certainly correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there is any real public vehicle other than the meetings when the Forest Service comes out to a public meeting, as they did last spring in Harrop or in Proctor. and then what the public got at that meeting, or there was one in Harrop as well, but was essentially the Forest Service's plan along with the licensees of the logging that was going to be taking place in the near future, but there was never any pre-consultation about that, and I don't know if the Forest Service is planning on putting the public advisory committees back in place or not. I know we were disbanded up north when we came to a majority decision of our committee that essentially ran in the face of what the Forest Service wanted to do with regard to logging on the West Skeena. We presented the majority report of the Public Advisory Committee, and that was our last meeting. We were disbanded, and some 5 years after that time, logging on the West Skeena commenced with a bridge being built over that river. And now I don't know if I have a concern about logging that's going to take place. I really don't know where to go. Now, I was appointed by the Regional District of Central Kootenay to be on this Kootenay Forest District's Timber Supply Area Steering Committee upon a recommendation of former Forest Minister Jack Kempf. Our board saw the recommendation. They appointed me to the Timber Supply Area Steering Committee, and I was never allowed to take a seat on that committee. In spite of the Regional District of Central Kootenay's having appointed me to that position, I was not allowed to sit with them, and the argument given was that it was too technical a committee for a layperson or a politician, as I was at that time, to be on. So I'm skeptical that there is a lot of public input into actual forest practice decision making.
Yeah, I would agree with Earl, and I would say that, you know, at best what we can do is suggest, but we have no power. The public has no power to make decisions, and I think that's what many people want now. They want to have a say in what's going on in their local forests, and I think the degree of education and the degree of knowledge that people have about logging practices is becoming greater and greater all the time, and some people have become so frustrated with the present system as it is that there are new people are saying, let's take it into our own hands, and there is now something called community resource boards, which are being formed at a grassroots level across BC, where the stakeholders, be they miners, trappers, ranchers, loggers, anyone who is using Crown land, they come together, make an inventory of all the resources in one area, and come to agreement themselves on how this land can be logged. And this practice is going on right now in the Chilcotins, and it's feeling its way through, but they've come up with some real successes and have found that after all this, there are still trees to be logged, you know, but it's taking into account all the interests of all the people who use the Crown land, which is our land, which is the land that belongs to the people of BC. And I think the forest industry, and I say this with great respect to Forest Service and industry people, has to go through a revolution, and I think it is going through a revolution, and practices will change and have to change, I think.
All right, on that note, let me interrupt. We are dealing with how the public makes a difference. That's our forum basis this evening, and I guess the question has actually been raised at this table. Does the public make a difference? Can the public make a difference? And we want to address that in just a moment. I want to say first that very soon we're going to be going to the phone lines. There will be about a 30-second public service announcement just before we do that, and we're going to take that public service announcement break right after we hear from Dale Anderson on this issue.
Well, very difficult to address a complex subject like this in the time available. I guess I'd have to just make a couple quick points to Earl. There is a public advisory committee in the Creston area. As a general rule, I think we found in the Forest Service that it's been most effective to deal with people, I guess, in terms of the local situation. An area, say, just in their watershed or the immediate viewscape. So we've tended to spend a lot of time dealing with watershed committees, such as the ones that Blair mentioned and the one that Russ McArthur is on. And further to your comment about the Kootenay Lake TSA Steering Committee, that committee doesn't actually exist anymore. There have been some changes made. It's now called the Forest Planning Committee, and actually there is a representative from the regional district on that committee, but it's the director of planning. And the reason for that, Earl, is that the planning process is a 5-year process, and it was felt that first off, having somebody with technical knowledge of land use issues was important, but also that you needed the continuity. A regional district director with a 3-year term might not be able to see the plan through. In terms of opportunities for public input, there are lots, actually. There is not opportunity for public decision making, and I think perhaps that's a point to make clear at this time. Within the legislative framework that we operate within, laws, regulations, and that type of thing, the Forest Service is given the responsibility of making decisions for resource use on Crown land.
Okay, thank you, Dale. We are going to take a break in just a moment, but the number to call is 354-4200. We are going to ask for your questions, and we will keep the responses somewhat limited in time so that hopefully we can get lots of calls in. We'll be right back after this public service announcement. We're back with the Forest Land Use discussion group, and we're taking your calls, 354-4200. There doesn't seem to be a call right at this second. Dale, we cut you off on an issue related to the planning level and land use, and we have a chart on the wall here that you're going to make reference to as you comment about this.
Yes, thanks, George. To reiterate briefly, though, I would like to mention that our local Forest Service district offices do have an open door policy, which means basically that anybody who is curious or has concerns or wants to express a point of view can do so. It's as simple as picking up the telephone or dropping in. Probably the most effective means of the public getting involved is during the planning stages, and that's obvious. It's easier to get some kind of a resolution before the trucks and the bulldozers are revving their engines. Any system of natural resource planning involves the concept of planning levels, and we've illustrated that on the chart on the wall over there. The highest one, provincial policies, that's just legislation. The rules of the game, the decision-making issue rests up there. The next level down, regional priorities, is simply where we decide which tasks are the most important and which ones get done first. The public input really begins, I would say, at the forest management planning stage. And in this area, what you're talking about there is the Kootenay Lake Resource Management Plan. That's the old TSA plan that Earl was mentioning. That is being revised at this time, and it will be going to public review at several stages during this year, hopefully. The next level down, once that's done, and I should mention perhaps that the forest management planning level is also where the allowable annual cut is calculated for timber. So you can see the importance of that particular plan. The next level down, local planning, is where I spend a great deal of my time. This is more at the watershed level, such as the Nelson watershed. And quite often we're dealing with groups of water users at this point. And the final level, resource development planning, as Blair mentioned earlier, these are plans developed by the forest industry or the Forest Service Small Business Forest Enterprise Program.
Okay, thank you, Dale. We're going to the phones. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm a member of the Blue Watershed Committee, and I'd just like to make the comment that people can make the difference. And we've had experience of getting involved in the planning process with Kalisnikoff as well as ATCO. And our discussions with them have come about with a bunch of changes, and they're always quite open to any discussions or concerns that we have.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Did you have any questions for the group?
Just how to get more people in the community aware of what's actually happening in the bush. We find a lot of people who have complaints or concerns never follow through and get in the bush with these people of expertise and have a look at actually what is happening and what concerns they have for what they're doing out in the woods.
Okay, thanks for your call. Is there anyone who'd like to respond to how do we get people more involved? Go ahead,
I'd
Russ.
like to make a comment with respect to the Nelson Watershed Management Team. That has had a city representative on it ever since the beginning, and right now it also has a technical advisor, Greg Yutzig. When we were allowed to work out our own terms of reference right at the beginning, and that was very important. And one of the things that we included in there was that all decisions must be by consensus. That is, any decision to go ahead must be by consensus. So while there's technical planning going on in which Greg Yutzig is involved, it has to come back to the team, and there has to be consensus before they can go ahead. Now, if consensus cannot be reached, then it can go to the next higher level of the Ministry of Forests, or even perhaps to the minister. One other comment I have to make on public involvement is that the most important public involvement, I think, is going to be leading up to the next election, because there have to be changes in the law. I feel that it's wrong that the Ministry of Forests should have control over, total control, and I mean the power to do what it feels necessary over a very great part of the area of the province. I think there have to be changes in that legislation.
Okay, that will lead us into a couple of questions, such as discussion related to Parks Plan 90 and public input into those, and the role, if any, of the Ministry of Environment within the decision on forest land use, and we'll deal with that in just a moment. Blair, you were going to comment on the...
Well, I was just going to say that we actually encourage people. We have an open door policy as well. Anybody can come in and voice their concerns to us, and we'll address them. But actually, we have to encourage that and stimulate it somewhat. People are not informed well enough to take part and participate and to have a productive outcome. So the more they participate too, we find, as Bill had mentioned too, is on the phone, is that they become quite involved, and they broaden, their knowledge really broadens, and they become, the result of that is that management decisions are more ironclad and more just better for everybody.
Yeah, I'd like to address the particular aspect of in public involvement with the situation in Blewett. I live out at the North Shore at 9 Mile, and I saw those cut blocks appearing above Nelson. I'm not sure exactly when they started, but they were cut out up there, and I go, oh, you know, I noticed them, and I thought that it was quite unsightly given the visual quality objectives that the Forest Service has been working on. And then they stabilized for a while, and then they started suddenly last summer growing again. And I go, holy smoke, those cut blocks are getting bigger. And I phoned Steve Flett, and he said, oh, they've just gone back into clean up, and they're enlarging it a bit. And I said, but Steve, I thought with this visual quality objectives, I said, I find that to be quite an eyesore in the sense that it's juxtaposed to Nelson in the valley bottom. It's quite eye-catching at 9 Mile. And Steve said, well, he said, our computer models didn't think it would be visible. And you know, I mean, this is something that people certainly disagree about, is the aesthetics of logging. But certainly, when you come to Nelson now at 9 Mile, that's very noticeable. And I don't know if other people have noticed that as I do, but I just go, my eye is drawn to that. It's minuscule relative to the cut blocks in the north, which are gigantic. And in that sense, and I don't think that it's an environmental problem in terms of water quality effects, but aesthetically, it certainly pulls your eye away from the lovely bridge across the Arm in the city of Nelson. You're going right up on that hillside, and this is the kind of thing when you say the public is not well enough informed. The public does not basically know what's going to happen. They wake up in the morning and they go, oh, gee, wonder what's happening up there. The forest is disappearing. And they don't know, and I think that this is basically a problem of all of us, that we do in fact have to become better informed about what's happening. And the West Arm Watershed Alliance is asking for a comprehensive plan. And I think that that's essentially what we want. We want to know what's going to happen. We don't want to wake up in the morning and say, oh, where's all that machinery going? Because if we know beforehand, then we can say, okay, well, let's sit down, see what you want, you listen to what we want, and then we can hammer out some kind of a reasonable way of going about this. These stop clear cut signs that everybody, many people have on their vehicles, I mean, this is a real, it's not just saying stop clear cutting. I mean, this is fairly serious. We believe that logging can be done economically and better if a different kind of prescription other than clear cutting is used.
Okay, what we're really looking at then, hopefully, is a win-win situation as opposed to a win-lose situation. And it may be that is a dream that is in fact impossible, and we have to do the best trade-off within that structure that we can. However, let's move on to Parks Plan 90. There obviously was a lot of interest here in Nelson, even as compared to down in Trail, on this particular issue. And how does public input influence this plan? And where do we go from here now that hearings have taken place here in Nelson?
Well, as you're probably aware, these hearings are being held all over the province. A number of areas were identified as possible study areas for provincial park designation, or under the Forest Service jurisdiction, wilderness area, which is not exactly a park, but commercial logging is not allowed there. And there are 4 proposed study areas within the Kootenay Lake District. A number of other ones have been identified by the public, including the south shore of the West Arm, as Earl mentioned. There's no question that the decision makers, which will ultimately be the provincial cabinet, are watching very closely to see what the public's response is in these open house forums that have been held.
You know, my opinion on this is that, you know, many of us have experienced, and I mean, I think it's in evidence, particularly on the coast of BC, what many people acknowledge is bad logging. And we're all a little bit afraid of what these clear cuts look like, how they affect the tourism and other aesthetic qualities. My own personal opinion about the parks plan is, I'm not sure I support it, but I support the spirit with which people are saying, let's treat this land carefully. After this conference that I was at in Victoria, I'm becoming less and less, I kind of waffled on the clear cut issue, like, I thought maybe clear cuts were okay sometimes. But more and more I see economic justification for not clear cutting, and it has to do with the long-term benefits and even the sustainability. An 80-year-old tree can grow and produce a lot more lumber than starting from scratch. I think that there are some real changes to be made and some good examples of partial and selective logging that could take place that don't destroy the forest canopy. I mean, this is what this show Voices in the Forest was about. It seems to me that there's some pretty strong evidence that clear-cut logging is not the way to go.
Well, that may be true in some cases, Marie, but I also think there's some pretty strong evidence that it is appropriate in other cases. I think ecologically sound forestry requires a very careful look at the site in question and deciding things like what level of sunlight do we want for the young seedlings, what do the seedlings require, what's the nutrient capital that we're going to be leaving on that site. And I'd just like to make one point, because Earl brought up the clear-cutting issue, and we end up spending an awful lot of time talking about questions of technical forest management, which we should, because it's extremely important. But one thing I didn't mention in my background, that my education was originally in agriculture. I thought that was complicated enough. I've since been taking forestry courses, and forestry is infinitely more complex. And you can have university professors that have spent their whole lives being educated on the subject disagreeing over something like the appropriateness of clear cutting in a particular spot. So to get too hung up on some of these things is maybe to lose sight of some of the others, perhaps.
I agree with you, and yet I think, and the only word I think of is a softer approach to forestry, and then we get rid of the word clear cut, which has all sorts of emotional impact, you know, pro, con, the extremes. But that's, I think if the public could be assured that logging was going to be done carefully, there wouldn't be this polarization between no clear cuts, or well, maybe some
That's
clear
quite
cuts.
true. Most people are not disagreeing about the basic questions of whether we should log in a sustainable manner, whether we should look out for visuals, whether we should look out for wildlife and things like that. Everybody agrees that we want to do all those things, which suggests to me that people really aren't as far apart as they sometimes think they are.
Okay, on that note, we're going to the phones again. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Yes, I wanted to ask, like I'm a teacher, and the question is, if any of you have children, or if you care for, the way children feel, and if they can never see an old tree, how do you think that would be, that, in this whole area? When my children were growing up, there's one place that some people fought to save where there's gigantic cedars, and that has always been a place that I've taken my children, and now that they're grown up, it's a special place for them. And how is it that we can't just take the children and show them what it was really like here? How is it that we wouldn't leave anything, not anything, for them?
Thanks for your question, ma'am.
It would be a tremendous tragedy if we left no special areas like that. I don't expect that would ever happen. And I certainly can't explain all of that. I would point out, though, that only roughly 1/3 of the total forest out there is considered, at this point, possible to harvest because of economics and other factors.
I'd like to go back to this business of clear cut as opposed to selective logging. And Dale, one of the arguments that I sometimes hear in favor of clear cut is that there's as much damage done to hillside drainage, for example, through the roads that go in as there is in the clear cut blocks, and that those roads would be necessary in almost the same number for selective logging, and therefore if you're going to have that kind of damage anyway, why not do maybe not massive clear cut blocks, but selective clear cut blocks, and then you sort of balance the economics of it with the impact on the environment. And I put the question to you, but certainly anyone else feel free to answer that, because it's not a totally a one-sided question.
Sure. No, they're probably the basic component of the ecosystem, which, if damaged, will really set the forest back, is the soil. And the soil can be damaged in a number of ways. You could clear cut in an inappropriate spot and have mass wasting or slumping. That's entirely possible. But generally speaking, the major causes of soil degradation are the roads, the landings, the skid trails, which is why cable harvesting systems are preferred on steep slopes, for example. Because as you can imagine, an area which is scalped clean and compacted, especially if it's going to be a permanent road, essentially that area has been removed from the forest land base indefinitely.
There's many influencing factors into the decision of a clear cut as opposed to a shelterwood. Soils is definitely one. Ecosystem, there's 2 stages of ecosystem. One is a pioneer species, which is the initial species to establish the site and get the site actually into a productive state. This pioneer species then falls off, and then a climax species will then come into the site. So in most cases in the Nelson area here, we have stands of fir large pine that are actually a pioneer species. They're still in the infancy stage. Cedar hemlock is actually the climax species. So in harvesting, we were actually removing that pioneer component and encouraging the climax species, or reintroducing the pioneer species. It's all part of the management plan, and it has to be addressed. Most of the West Arm actually in 1902 was actually burnt. Up to 90% of it was snags and stumps, and it's in its pioneer stage now. The oldest, there's certainly draws within that West Arm that are over 150, 200 years old, to 300 years old, but the majority of it is 90 years old.
Okay, Earl, you want to respond to that? And I'll
Well,
come to you in just a second. But it is a phone-in, 354-4200, and there is time for your calls yet if you're watching this live on Wednesday night. If not, it's a rerun, so just sit back and enjoy it. Go ahead, Earl.
Well, the last caller has made me think a little bit philosophically of the broader perspective now. For example, in northern Michigan was at one time a white pine forest. It was absolutely completely clear cut. Now there are 9 acres of virgin forest left in the northern part of the Lower Peninsula. That's all. 9 acres in an area that was hundreds and thousands of square miles of climax white pine forest. And I honestly don't see, when I look at British Columbia as a province, I mean, we're talking about our area here, and a lot of people in the Kootenays don't realize how low the impact is here compared to areas like the Bowen Lakes area outside, these giant, I don't know how big the clear cuts are there, but I've heard hundreds of square miles of, okay, so if we've got that type of situation there, we have to view Nelson area instead of just another timber supply area, or as Alan Early referred to it my first summer here as a woodlot. It's not. We have some other things that we've got to protect here. And I would like to start viewing this globally. Look at the global biosphere right now, the tremendous impacts on the global biosphere from war, from drought in California, from desertification. We have an area here that's got still a living biosphere, that it sustains our lives, it sustains wildlife, it sustains the spirituality of these people that want to take their children into old growth forests. I say we've got a sacred trust here. And I think that it's our responsibility as conscientious adults to do something with it so that our children in 15 years can sit around and have this same discussion, but that the forests are still there. Because I'm very skeptical about foresters running the forest.
We're basically working on a sustainable yield, and it's hard when you're dealing with pioneer species. You've got one age group, and you don't have actually sustainable yield there because you have to address it step by step. You have to encourage multi-age, multi-layered stands to have a sustainable yield.
And that's why you should selection harvest.
Probably our most valuable.
Okay, we're going to the phones again. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Hi, I want to go back to Dale Anderson's comment about the cable logging. Has that been attempted in this area? I'm from the coast. I don't really know what the type of logging is in this area. Is there cable logging in this area, and what effect has it had on the watersheds, the quality of the water? Thank you.
Thank you.
There is cable logging in the area, yes. In all likelihood, there's going to be an increase that way because the cable logging, first off, is generally used, it's the preferred system on steep slopes for one thing, because as you can imagine, you really can't drive skidding equipment up and down a steep slope. You're likely to kill the operators, and the alternative to that is to cut more roads in the side, and that can remove an awful lot of land from the land base and cause considerable erosion. On steep slopes and sensitive soils, cable harvesting is probably going to be better in terms of protecting water quality because there is less soil disturbance and fewer roads.
I was going to say that probably our most valuable resource in the forested area is the soil, and equally valuable the water. Water is really far more important and far more valuable than minerals or anything else. We are moving, as Earl has said, into a time when the global warming is occurring. There seems to be no question. The areas of, say, California, where there's been a tremendous production of food, are running right out of water. The productive areas for food are going to move north, and they're going to move quite a few of them into Canada. It's very important to preserve our soils and to preserve our water. I think that the idea of the parks, increasing parks use, is very important. We only have a little over 6% of the province of British Columbia set aside as parks right now. The Brundtland report recommends 12%. I think we've got to move toward that.
Okay, on that note, we'll go to the phones again. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Yeah, I was in listening to this, and I've been to two meetings, one at the theater and the other one at City Council to hear West Arm make their presentations. And all I can say is that their unqualified hyperboil is all that they're pertaining to. The pictures they took were taken out of a helicopter. They showed a person skiing up there. It's an 8-hour walk to get up to the snow. The background pictures are all off the Kootenay glaciers. The presentation is nothing but hyperboil. At the meeting, the city council meeting, they even discussed how they put it into the schools, the ecological week in school, and had the school children write Victoria Parks 90 in favor of this wilderness park. Now, we have top qualified people in the forestry, in mining, at the universities, and everything else that take exceptional good care of our resources. This is their job. They are qualified, highly educated, compared to what we have presented as just an emotional stand like this man just made. Now, there's no justification for his remarks whatsoever. He's not qualified to make that type of a remark.
Who are you referring to, sir?
The fellow in the red sweater. But anyway, to carry it through, these area there that they're asking for has no unique features. I've walked the area ever since that trap mile was in 9 Mile Creek. And by the way, they had 9 Mile Creek cut in with the Nelson watershed, which Mr. McArthur will tell you is not true. In addition to that, they was addressing 8-foot Douglas firs, as if they grew in that area. When anybody with any knowledge at all knows that these fir trees just grew to that size in the rainforests of the coast and the redwoods in California. And it's just straight hyperbole what they're pushing. I have more faith in the ability of the forestry and the logging companies to look after our future. Our social programs are being cut. They said there's no logging values in that area, and yet there's $1.6 billion worth of logs, according to what the gentleman from Spokane Forest said. And it's misleading. It's very misleading.
Well,
And
sir,
I could probably go on for an hour, but that's about enough to express an opinion on what I think of these people that are unqualified and coming in and trying to take over everything. They're not worried about the septic tanks out there, the sewage systems, or anything like that. They're worried more about little water boxes in the creek. The proposition to Nelson is chlorinization and water supply to the cities. They have sewage treatment plants. They have an utterly different thing than these people are going for. Thank you.
okay, appreciate your call, sir. One of the wonderful things about this country is it is a democracy, and people with differing points of view have the right to have input and be heard.
I would like to make a quick response to his statement about experts, sorry, in the industry and the Forest Service. Bella Coola right now, and the Forest Service and industry have been the experts there. They're looking at a fall down period in 10 years when there won't be any trees left, harvestable lumber left in that area to harvest. So I am very skeptical of experts myself, and I think that the people who live in communities have a right to be educated, yes, on these issues, and to help make decisions about these kind of issues with the experts. I think we fall into traps if we let the experts make all the decisions.
Okay, we're going to the phones again. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Yes, I am a little bit concerned with some of the comments made by the previous caller. I'm not sure whether he will be happy or not until he drinks nothing but water that comes in bottles from someplace else. But here's two major concerns that I have. First of all, I'm not sure how we can look at the possibilities of logging safely in any major community water supply. I have three reasons for stating this. Number one, as soon as you log in any kind of situation, you're going to increase the water siltation because you increase the runoff. Number two, as soon as you log in an area or have any kind of industrial activity in an area, you're going to increase the chance of pollutants entering the water supply. For example, vehicle wastes. Another thing that happens is, as soon as you log in any kind of a water supply, you're going to increase the chance of human-borne wastes because you have humans working in the area, because you have road access into the area, and that's going to increase the chance of disease into the water supply for the communities. The next thing is, in the West Arm area and the main Kootenay Lake area, the fishing, recreational fishing has been very popular for many years and is right now in a very struggling situation. And I'm concerned about what logging does to the spawning channels. For example, in Kootenay Creek, Redfish Creek, and Meadow Creek, there have been many hundreds of thousands of dollars of public money spent in developing kokanee spawning channels. And all of these have been seriously endangered by siltation of the eggs in the spawning channels caused by inappropriate logging practices. The most current one was this spring in the Meadow Creek spawning channel in the north arm of Kootenay Lake, and I don't see how logging in a watershed is compatible with domestic water supplies for major population areas, or how it's compatible with those areas which are set aside as spawning channels for the fishing industry. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your call, sir.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead.
I work in the woods about 200 days of the year. With regards to redfish, I've been in there before the logging actually started up on the higher ends of it. As I walk the drainage, I'm quite observant, and I take note of things that happen naturally. And I went up about to the 4 kilometer mark on the creek itself, and there's a natural slump. It's nature's way. We try and prevent it as much as we can, but nature itself encourages it as well. And it's very hard to deal with in a lot of cases. So we take our preventative measures as much as we can to avoid it, and we involve the public as much as they can to see if they have any input and concerns as well.
In respect to the last caller's comment, the City of Nelson has been told by one of these experts that some people don't like that if as soon as a logging road starts to be built into, say, the 5 Mile watershed, the city is going to have to install an expensive water filtration system, yes, which could cost $500,000 or more. And I really feel that the present watersheds are so well protected naturally with no excess that we've been able to get away without filtration systems for 50 years. And there, as far as I know, there has not been a case of waterborne disease in Nelson in that time. And that's something that we really have to think about whether we can give it up.
The technology of water sampling has changed a great deal in the last few years as well. We were able to get very, very minuscule counts of bacterial compounds within the water, and that technology was not there 50 years ago. People would pick up a glass of water. It would be obvious if it was dirty, but they wouldn't be able to see biology.
Okay, we have about 1 minute left, but we have another caller. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have one concern with the logging, and that is the little trees with the herbicides and pesticides that they'll be planting in the watersheds, and I would like you to address that question, please.
Your concern would be these things getting into the water that we would drink, I assume.
Yes.
Go ahead.
First off, it's extremely unlikely that herbicides or pesticides would be used in a domestic watershed. We can't say categorically that they would not be used, but it's very unlikely. At the same time, it's entirely possible, again, what I mentioned, it's complicated. Something like mechanical preparation of a site could pose a greater threat to water quality than a herbicide in some cases.
I'd like to just say one thing, just in closing here, that really enjoyed tonight's discussion, and I hope that you can get another panel that have the tourist industry in here, the business people of Baker Street. There's a lot of vested interest in what happens in the watershed, and I hope that not just the Forest Service and the eco-freaks are involved, but everybody with a vested interest.
Okay, we're virtually off the air. Thank you for watching, and this has been a special phone-in on the use of forested areas. Thank you for watching.